Good afternoon, everybody. Brilliant, we're up and live. If it's Wednesday afternoon, 4 o'clock, I must be in Dublin. So, by the way, anybody doing this in the future, don't underestimate the time it takes to get between sessions when we finish one and people want to ask you questions. So, great to see such a packed room. So obviously there's a lot of interest in the topic we're about to discuss, and I think it's right on theme for GFSI. Must be right on theme for GFSI, talking about strengthening trust in audit systems, and then GFSI's commitment to progress. And I think just before we start, I think there's a small introduction here, which is that we kind of all know in the food industry, in the manufacturing and the retail section, that when an incident hits, it hurts the whole food industry. And I know for a fact, and I can see Eduardo over there, so I'm going to say hi. I'm sure that when the problem hit McDonald's, you weren't sitting in your offices laughing and cheering. You were sitting there knowing that that's going to have an impact on everybody's reputation. That's why the food safety is seen as a non-compete amongst the industry. And the next thing is that we know that incidents happen, but there's a process that you go through afterwards to regain trust. And it's fundamental that you accept that things happen and go wrong, but that you've then got a process by which you can rebuild trust. And I think that's such a key word, and it's the segue I wanted to bring into strengthening the trust in the audit system. So, having made that little segue, I'm going to ask the panelists to talk about, and they're all from GFSI, what is it that GFSI is doing at the moment to strengthen trust in the audit systems?
Weren't you going to start with your story?
He was.
That's what I thought. I don't think his microphone is on.
No. Either or pass this one along. No, they've turned that one off now.
Trying to get me steps in.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Howard Papula. I lead the food safety, quality, regulatory compliance, and product development teams at the Kroger Company, retailer in the U.S. with 2,500 stores, 32 manufacturing facilities, and 44 distribution centers. We have well over 10,000 vendors that manufactures products in our brands. There is no way to effectively manage 10,000 vendors with the resources that we have. One thing that we've done is to put our trust in certificates issued to our vendors, for which we have required that they get audited to a scheme that has been benchmarked to GFSI. And I know that that's considered normal amongst everyone here with the scope of responsibility, whether it's as much as I have, more than it, or even less than it. And truly, that is what it is. But when a trust is broken, and here I'm putting on my Kroger hat here. When you come into our stores, and I'll get a little personal, We are probably the number one customer of a company called Boar's Head. We all know the story about Boar's Head. The first debt associated with the food safety event that happened last year happened in one of my stores. I had to be the individual that informed my CEO of that, and it's an experience that I do not want to ever, ever have the opportunity to do again. But a trust was broken there. That was a facility that was certified, that we had an audit on file for. The next in the process for us, and thank God my good friend Natalie has taken on the food safety leadership role at the Boar's Head, and she's going to be fixing everything, is to reestablish that trust. And the reason why I took a personal angle to this is because I want you all to understand what the feeling looks like. So when you see me out there, and you look at me as the co-chair of GFSI steering committee, I also have this side to me, which is my day job. And that is why this topic is so important. And you'll hear from my colleagues today what GFSI's commitment is to advancing that trust that we have in the audit process.
Thank you, Howard. Thanks for that. And I think that story, the personal element of it, resonates very strongly. I think everybody who's a professional in this area, nobody wants to be in that position of having to talk about fatalities that are associated with their stores or their companies or their brands. So each of you, I'd just like you to all think or take out your messages. What is it that GFSI, what do you see as the challenges from a GFSI perspective on trust in the audit system?
Well, you know, it was quite intentional that we chose, by the way, I'm Mark Freiling. I'm here, I lead food safety and quality at General Mills. Some of you may not know what General Mills is. We're one of the largest food manufacturers of branded foods around the world. Some of the brands that, if you live here in Europe, that may be familiar to you are things like Old El Paso or Nature Valley or Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and we have many, many other brands as well. So it was intentional that we started with Howard's story because he had that personal connection to the tragic events associated with that manufacturer in the U.S. What I wanted to talk a little bit about was, so what do we do to try to understand what happened? And really, what GFSI does, given its governance role in this space, is to ask the question, were all of our governance mechanisms in the ecosystem working properly? And one of the ways that I think that we do that is to have conversations with the organizations that provide oversight to the auditor and to the organization that provides oversight to the organization that oversees the auditor, and then look at the processes for benchmarking, make sure that there weren't gaps in those processes that led us to have a faulty audit. And that really goes to trusting the audit system, in my opinion. It's much like what happens as a food business operator when we have a failure in a food safety system that leads to potentially or known to be hazardous product. We do a root cause analysis. We try to understand, how did our systems fail? And were our systems part of what enabled us to fail like that? And I think we all know, at least all of us that are food business operators, we can't make systems that are perfectly fail-proof, but we want to make them as fail-proof as possible. And so objectively interrogating, were things working as designed? Are we able to find gaps that could be closed, should be closed? And then having the follow-up to address those things and hopefully not repeat those errors.
Thank you, Mark. And pass it over to Deanne.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Deanne Akins-Lewenthal with Mondelez International. And since Mark pointed out his brands, I'll point out a few of ours. Hopefully you're familiar with Cadbury or Milka here in Europe, or Oreo, and my favorite, Sour Patch Kids, if you're from the U.S. But just to put my company hat on, and really what it also plays into what Mark was just talking about is kind of governance and trust, that goes down to the auditor, him or herself, right? When we talk within our own company about making sure we have the right programs in place to build auditor capability with our internal auditors, we also want to see that with the auditors coming into our facilities or our suppliers' facilities, and not just coming in and asking just basic questions, but actually coming in and asking questions and really understanding the data, right? Really understanding the risk of the product, potential risk of the product that they're coming in and auditing, to understand complex manufacturing sites and how complex manufacturing sites work. So really, for me, it is not just seeing the data, but being able to understand that data, really ask the right questions, really drive to where the potential risk is as they're evaluating that food safety system. And that's one of the things that we're looking at working on internally, and also an expectation from an external standpoint.
Thank you, Deanne. So, Tom?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is the first time that I'm speaking at this conference here for the Dublin event, so let me introduce myself. And I'm going to do this two ways. First is from an industry point of view, and the next is from a GFSI point of view. So I'm Tom Weister. I'm Vice President, Global Food Safety and Quality for Starbucks. I've been with Starbucks for 7 years now, but have been in the food industry in a food safety and quality capacity for about 30 years. Can't believe how quickly time flies. All of my time prior to Starbucks was in food manufacture for some of the companies, actually a few of the companies that are represented here in the audience. On the GFSI side, as you already heard, this panel is entirely comprised of GFSI members, but what you may not know is we are actually GFSI leadership. So Howard and Mark share the chair role. Howard represents the retailer college, Mark the manufacturer, and Deanne and I share the vice chair role, Deanne from a manufacturing side and me, Starbucks, on the retailer side. As such, we are involved and we lead the subcommittees that manage much of the work that is taken up by GFSI. And we're going to get into this a little bit later in the session, but we'll talk about what some of the initiatives and progress and so forth of the work that we're doing inside of GFSI and how it's targeted directly at this topic, and importantly, where we need your help. So that's by way of introduction. If I could take just another minute or so to answer Roy's question. Roy's question was around what are the primary challenges that we have in establishing trust in the audit system. And my simple answer to that is over-reliance. And I know it might feel like a bit of a controversial thing to say at a GFSI conference, right? But if I were to ask you, and you don't have to raise your hand, how many of you right now have an open action item from one of your recent audits? I bet there'd be a lot of hands that go up. If I were to ask how many critical findings or major findings have you found in those audits, I bet I would see a lot of hands go up. So what we need to be very cognizant of, and I'm putting my industry hat back on, is how much are we relying on the audit to do? Are we overwhelming it? Do we have requisite and supplemental programs elsewhere that are carrying their equal share of the weight? And importantly, are we following up on those things that have been identified? And I think if we explore the example that Howard shared a moment ago any more deeply in this conversation, we'll find opportunities exactly along those lines.
Howard?
I am also the chair of the technical committee of GFSI. So in my role, I get to see a lot of things, all technical issues. And issues around trust and audits also crosses my desk, and some of my colleagues who serve on the committee as well. And I can tell you that on our committee, our commitment to once certified, accepted everywhere is very, very resounding, and all across the stakeholder members as well. And we desire for the ecosystem to work the way it is designed to work. When it doesn't work, that is when conflicts, disagreements creep into it. And in several iterations of the GFSI conference, I have advocated and said many times that every player within the ecosystem must do their share in order for us to maintain that cycle of trust that we currently have. Now, things do happen within the ecosystem. Heck, we disagree with our partners, our children, our home. How we handle this, how we close out those disagreements, determines how well we're able to move forward. So I'm sure there's still some conversations to be had, but I will leave it as that right now.
So you'll have heard an awful lot there, a use of the word trust, and I think that the interesting add-on there was from Tom was the over-reliance. But the main thing that's driving this through is that it's impossible for us to get to all the suppliers, and we do rely on those third-party audits, and our trust in those third-party audits is critical, and the consumer's trust in our brands is critical. I think one of the things that makes sure that everybody's aligned is having a common set of values and principles and a common agenda. And I did a piece of homework, and I did a calculation, and GFSI since 2013 has avoided something like 44 million unnecessary audits. Now, you could, if you're a supplier, look at that from a very positive side, because you can then focus not on preparing yourself for an audit, but on actually doing the stuff that you need to do to stay safe. I think if you're in the audit business, you might look at that and say, that's 44 missed certificates I've not given out. But I think at the moment we've got enough certificate or enough audits going on that we haven't got enough auditors for. So I don't see that too much of as a problem. But I think the key principle, I think, that we're trying to drive towards is to make sure that it's everybody's goal is to make sure we're keeping the consumer safe. And that's what we're all pushing towards. And I think the realization from the Steerco recently actually is that might be a vision for us, Mark, but that's not our mission. Our mission is to make sure that we play our role in the harmonization space. So I think that brings me on to the next part of the question, which is, so concretely, what's GFSI doing in this space? And by the way, the fact that we're discussing this today, it probably wasn't on the agenda before Boar's Head, but we certainly felt that it had to be on the agenda after Boar's Head. So, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. So some of you may have been in the discussion that we had yesterday morning in the early part of the first day, and one of the things that I talked about there was certainly renewing our focus on that mission around once audited, trusted everywhere. And to me, that is a statement that is very much about governance and ensuring that regardless of who the auditor is, who is employing that auditor, what recognized scheme they are auditing against, that the food business operator is confident that they are getting an audit that is done with quality, is finding gaps in the elements of an effective food safety system and highlighting those regardless of kind of what recognized scheme was audited against. because at this kind of highest level, if you will, the schemes that are recognized by GFSI within a particular part of the food industry, it's kind of, if you're recognized there, you are hitting all of the key parts of the benchmark requirements. And the reason I talk about it that way is that, you know, clearly there are different pieces of the total food supply chain. I mean, there are primary producers, there are farmers, there are manufacturers, there are commodity harvesters and cleaners and millers, et cetera. And then there are distribution centers, and there's many, many parts of the supply chain. And some of these schemes are designed to fit certain parts of that total food supply chain. And so, you know, I think the way that is helpful to think about it really is to start with the audited site, whatever it is, and then kind of work your way backwards up the chain to really to the scheme itself and to GFSI. And what we want to make sure is that anybody who is in that pool of acceptable programs is able to kind of cover all of the key parts for that particular part of the food chain.
Yeah, when I think about the overall GFSI ecosystem, you know, we don't always bring the regulator the first part of the conversation. And I also back yesterday morning, which seems like 3 days ago, but yesterday morning, talked a little bit about the work that GFSI is doing in the regulator space and how we're enhancing the dialogue in the public-private partnership piece. And we are going to have a G2B, a government to business meeting tomorrow. And as part of that agenda, we're going to talk about the voluntary third-party assurance program and how regulators can use that program as part of their risk-based approaches, right? I mean, I don't believe there's any country or regulatory body out there that has enough auditors for everything they need to do. So how can they use a program like GFSI, who has the benchmarking of the audit schemes, to help them make risk-based decisions of where they need to go? But I think it all comes back to harmonization and the benchmarking that GFSI does and having that audit integrity there, and then also being able to ensure that if a manufacturer has a GFSI recognized certificate, it's an authentic certificate. So they're interested in the same things that we're interested in, and I'm really happy to be able to work with the regulatory side to be able to bring them on the same journey with us.
So the question that we're answering is, what is GFSI doing to overcome the challenges that we talked about just a moment ago? And you've picked up already that Howard, in one of the many hats that he wears, leads the technical subcommittee. You just heard from Deanne, she leads the public-private partnership. It's a bit of a mouthful. I lead the capability building subcommittee. So let me talk about that just for a moment. So when we think about our supply chains, we know that the weakest link is where we have the most risk, right? Where all of us as food safety professionals are focused on prevention. We're looking as far upstream as we can. But if you have the means to be here in Dublin at this conference, it tells me that you're probably a pretty sophisticated member of the food community. There's a lot of food business operators out there that are not sophisticated. And GFSI is focused on them and concerned about them because we recognize the risk it represents at the very beginning of the supply chain. So within the capability building subcommittee, we have a program, and it's called the Global Markets Program. Effectively, it's a free toolkit that is hosted online for anyone to access. And it spells out in really simplified terms the basics of a food safety system. And it's not a certification. GFSI is not in the certification business. We have very talented CPOs and CBs and a whole enormous community that manages that piece. GFSI sets the benchmark. But we want to help the small operators, the unsophisticated operators, mitigate risks before it hits your supply chains. So that's exactly what we are focused on within the subcommittee that I lead, right? So focused on prevention, early, unsophisticated, small operators, giving them a pathway to certification, and then bringing them into the broader GFSI ecosystem such that not only can they deliver safer quality food, which all of us want, but it unlocks access to commerce. It gives them an opportunity to grow their business. It will introduce them to many of the players here in this room so that collectively we can be elevating the industry. So it's just one of the things that we're doing to overcome these challenges.
When there's a food safety incident involving a certified site, questions are going to be asked. I don't know how many are on LinkedIn, but there was an article that was very, very critical of the entire process of certification and certifying sites after the Boar's Head recall, and rightfully so. The question has to be asked around what happened. And there are various levels of the ecosystem that would need to answer that question. Boar's Head is going to have to do their own root cause analysis, but so does GFSI. And that lies in the technical committee, which I chair, with 3-4 other individuals. The postmortem has to be done to understand what failed in the audit. And the question is this: what did the process of certifying that site to a GFSI recognition did to contribute to that event? It may not have anything to do with sanitation or how the plant does its job, but it would examine what the certification process looks like, from the benchmarking to the CPO down to the CB. If any areas of the benchmarking requirement was breached that led to this. That is the only way in which we can learn and improve the process and reestablish the trust in the system. Number two, our subcommittee on technical matters also has the oversight of the BMRs, which is the benchmarking requirements. There's a current version out there, version 2024. And as we all know, the changes to this benchmarking requirements are done via inputs from Codex. Anytime Codex changes, we gather the industry together, practitioners like you, and we work together to update those benchmarking requirements. Ultimately, our goal as individuals, as players within the ecosystem, is about the safety of the consumers out there. So again, it boils down to us doing the right things and making sure that the benchmark is set well, the benchmark process goes well, the CBs does their share of it, and ultimately, the FBOs does what they need to do. But as technical committee of the GFSI SteerCo, we are often labeled as the brains of everything that's going on, and rightfully so, because we get to be the ones that ask the tough questions. We have to reestablish trust in the audit system. We've been tasked with the responsibility to do that, and quite frankly, what I ask of you is that if you're in a similar situation, you work with us to help to reestablish that trust that the consumers have. Every time, we take an audit certificate from a supplier, we are trusting of that supplier. Every time a supplier goes into our stores and pick an item or buy something, they are trusting the retailer that what they're buying is safe.
So thanks for that, Howard. I think there's a lot of messages in there, and I'm going to almost change my role a bit from moderator to a little bit of participant in the discussion if I can. So there is a key message going through here, which is when things happen and they go wrong, it's normal that trust gets lost. The key part is rebuilding the trust. And I think it was a politician who once said it's never the original scandal that causes a government to fall, but it's the cover-up that brings the government down. The difficult part of that, though, is being able to admit that something went wrong. And if we try and cover up that nothing went wrong, all we do is we undermine trust even further, and that makes the whole thing of auditing even more untrustworthy. So I think it is a new thing in some ways. I don't think as an organization, as a profession, I think when I look back at GFSI, I think Frank Yanis wrote a paper on it back in 2017. And he said GFSI, along with some other authors, and I can't remember their names, but they all said that GFSI has done a great job on the benchmarking process on harmonizing the schemes. What we've not done is a great job on harmonizing the operation of the schemes. Yeah. Now, I think that whether that's true or not, that's what he concluded, and I think the challenge for GFSI is we make sure we refocus on benchmarking and harmonization, that we start to look at this operational piece, which includes the lessons learned from when things go wrong, because if we don't, we're just going to continue to erode trust. But I think there is a message here that I personally, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, want to give on here, that this isn't a journey where we want to raise the bar and hit people on the bottom of the chin. And we recently heard some feedback that race to the top was interpreted as a race between the CPOs. It's not. It's a journey that we're all on together, and I think what we're looking for is the partnership whereby as we try and raise the bar, we don't hit anybody on the chin, but we bring everybody with us. And I think if we can succeed in that, we're going to do an awful lot to make progress. So having switched role from a moderator to a panelist, I'm going to switch back again now and say, comments on that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I so absolutely agree that it is about continuous improvement for all of the actors that are participants in this ecosystem. And, I think what you describe here, Roy, is just being open and honest with ourselves and with the other players in the ecosystem when things go wrong, and looking at what happened and what might have contributed to it for each of the parts of the overall process that we individually own. And it's really about kind of trying to get to a point where, again, we can say with confidence that everything worked the way it was designed to work. We know that a audit is a snapshot, not a movie. And so even though if everything was working perfectly, it's still possible that a manufacturing site could have an event come out of it. However, I think we have the obligation to make sure that we can stand in front of whoever asks and say, in response to that event, we interrogated our processes with the honest look at, first of all, were things working the way that they were designed? And second, did we miss something? And if we missed something, we put something new in place to help fix that. If it wasn't working as way it designed, we addressed that. And if it was working as designed and we couldn't find any gaps, then okay, so then it really comes down to the operation at the food business operator and how do they drive consistency in that.
Deanne?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm not sure I have much to add because I think Mark hit most of it, but I think it is, we're all in this together, right? And it's that mindset, and it's coming to the table with the mantra that, it is the greater good and food safety, we want food safety for everyone, for people everywhere. So for me, it's just putting on that right hat and coming in with a common good that we'll get there together. And I think that's the important piece we all need to keep reminding ourselves.
Thanks. Tom, anything to add, or are you?
No, I think it's been said very well.
Great. So we're drawing towards the end. And Howard, you all right with that, or do you?
I can chime in real quickly, and one or two things that I would want to add is that we all have CPOs that we work with. We have CBs that we work with. But one thing that I want to remind everyone is that when it comes to benchmarking, there is no competition right there. Every single scheme that is out there that is recognized by GFSI has been benchmarked, and we found them to be the same. There is no competition there. The competition is in service and delivery of those standards. We should never be having the conversation, my standard is better than yours, or I prefer this standard over that one. The conversation we should be having is, oh, that CB does a great job in getting my report to me on time. My certificates gets to me on time. The auditor sits down with me, takes me through the report. It's in the delivery of the audits, not in the standards up there, because they've all been benchmarked. And that is why we say, once certified, accepted everywhere.
Thanks, Howard. I think that's a really clear way of laying out what I was alluding to at the beginning with asking Eduardo the question, because if we all start to compete on food safety, the consumer just loses trust in the whole system. Suddenly we're saying, oh, my food is safer than yours and all the rest of it, and you won't find the industry doing that. Where we will compete is on price, on service delivery, on value to the consumer in whatever way we do. But the fact that we put food on the market, it's implicit in that. It has to be that it is safe. And that's exactly what we're saying with the benchmark requirements, isn't it? We've benchmarked them, they're on the market, they are delivering the level of safety that we want. It's an important point to bring out. So we're getting towards the end, and I'm conscious now, I'd like to get, as we look towards the future, what do you see? What do you see as, is there a role for innovation? Is there a call for action? Is there some change of behavior? Something you'd like to see as we all move forward on this journey together? And I'm going to start at the opposite end, Mark, give you a chance to think this time and start with Howard.
An airplane never flies just because it's a Boeing plane. There's a lot of work that goes into making an aircraft flies. The company that makes the wings is different from the company that makes the engine or the fuselage, And therein lies the success that we must all achieve here in looking at the future. That no player in that food safety ecosystem can go it all alone. No, you can't. A supplier of the aircraft fuselage cannot fly the fuselage alone. You need the wing, you need the engine, you need the tails. You need the furnitures in the plane, The players in the food safety ecosystem need each other. You can't go it all alone. And your success depends on the success of that guy that ran the last mile, that handed the baton to you. So let's work together to make this world better for the consumers out there by ensuring that we have safe foods on their table every single day by doing our part within that ecosystem.
So Roy asked us, what role does innovation play here? And one of the undercurrents that we've been talking about, obviously, Boar's Head, and I think all of us, even not being very close, not being on the inside, can safely assess that there were risks that were either not identified or there were risks that were not addressed. So my answer to the question around where we can innovate is consistent with that theme around unidentified or unanswered risk. And what I would say is we need to be looking at unconventional signals, non-traditional data sources. GFSI and our benchmark requirements and all of the work that goes into the ecosystem from that point forward are fantastic at identifying food safety risks. But there could be nuances to your business that you need to be an expert in. I'm in the restaurant business, and I'll tell you that the age of a restaurant, the urbanity of a restaurant, suburban versus urban, brand new construction versus, 15-year-old build. I can tell you the turnover in staff. I can tell you the tenure of the store manager. I can go on and on and on with regard to what I consider to be food safety metrics. All of those are food safety metrics, every single one of them. Because, if you had the choice to go into a fully staffed, well-trained, stable, restaurant environment, you would choose that one over another one, right? The trick in the restaurant business is getting that very diverse fleet of restaurants to operate as one, despite their current limitations or challenges. So back to the main point, we have to be clear that we have a really strong understanding of what our primary food safety metrics are, but we need to be looking at the unconventional, new signals that are out there, those that impact food safety.
Yeah, and back to the question around innovation. And, at Mondelez, just like probably everyone else on the stage and in the audience, we're on a digital journey, and we're asking lots of questions around digital transformation. How can digital tools help? How can artificial intelligence play a part? And, we've talked about, even we think about our internal audits, as we have an internal audit team, about how do we use AI to get faster insights into our audits? How do we calibrate our auditors using that information? So, I think it's important for us to consider other tools that may be coming along that can really give us some really great insights to help us continue to push food safety forward.
I'll try to answer the question here too. We have for a number of years talked about the need for a way to verify the authenticity of a certificate that has been granted and that being tied to an actual audit, and our commitment to trying to identify a way to deliver that. And it's been a lot harder than we expected. There have been several tries that have gone down in flames, to use an American term. I don't know if that means anything to all the audience, but we remain committed, and we're feeling optimistic that this will be something that will come to fruition, and hopefully sooner rather than later. And I would argue that the digital transformation that is happening around us is helping us to feel that optimism.
Oh, no, I don't need that, do I? I don't need that. So I'm going to wrap up with a summary, if I can, which is what I've heard is that food safety is a non-compete. That we are all working in the name of the consumer, and nobody wants to be in a position where they're having to hold their hand up to somebody having lost their lives through the receipt of our goods or services. Nobody wants to be there. We know it happens, and the key when it happens is an honest look, and there's an expression in the ugly mirror, using the tools that we've got like root cause analysis to find out what went wrong so that we can learn the lessons from that to avoid repeating those mistakes. There is a role for everybody to play, and none of us can do this alone. We're all in it together, and it's about time we all started working together to reflect that. The last piece is that there is a role for innovation. We're starting to see that instead of measuring the old lagging indicators of pathogens or whatever it is you're measuring, Tom, lovely examples of those leading indicators, and I know the food industry is building upon that now, learning from the occupational safety industry to move to near misses and other things before you get to that worst part of the pyramid, which is the peak. I think the call to action here is that we all want to work together to fix this. We all play a part, and we really are looking forward to working with you all because you're all here. And I feel immensely proud of this industry. I remember thinking back, we kept the world fed during COVID. And if we can do that without supply chain disruption, we can do anything. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we'll see you all afterwards.